Coming up, I'll tell you why a superstar trade may not be on the horizon for the Nets and what the team's rebuild goals should be this season. All that and more after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And on today's show, it's Fan Take Friday. I took questions and takes from listeners on a wide range of subjects, including star trades, roster management, tank goals, and more. So let's get it going. Rolling right through these in the order that they came in. First question. Considering the ESPN poll saying Zion Williamson is the most likely NBA star to request a trade this season, how likely is it that Shawn Marks and co would be interested if Giannis stays with the Bucks? So, yes, there was an ESPN poll that they put out where they had a panel of people who agreed that Zion Williamson was the most likely NBA star to ask out this coming season and be traded. And Zion has been a name that has been not linked to the Nets, but like has been out there in the ether, with the Nets obviously having a desire to go big game hunting some point in the future. He's been a realistic person because there's obviously been some turmoil there in New Orleans. There's been questions about whether he was going to be a guy on the move. From the Nets perspective, I'm just not so sure that he's a Nets guy. Like, he's supremely talented, and I think that the intrigue, from the Nets end, if he were to hit the market, or for any team, would be that it's sort of a buy low guy, obviously. It's the upside potential of what he could be. We all remember when he came in the draft, what people expected him to be. He was one of the most highly touted high school and college recruits we'd seen in some time, and he just hasn't really lived up to that. And so it would be a buy low scenario, but I do still think if Zion hit the market, that there would be several teams who would be interested. So while it's buying low relative to what his upside would be, I still think that he would fetch New Orleans some kind of return on the market. And then from the Nets perspective, he's just not a guy that strikes me as a Shawn Marks guy. Like, we've heard a lot of, the things that the Nets have been looking for in guys in drafts. And we've heard a lot about, some of the criticisms of Shawn Marks. He likes to draft Boy Scouts, and he likes to have these guys that are very polished and obviously hard workers and aren't going to cause any problems. And that just hasn't been Zion Williamson up to this point in his career. He's had a lot of off-court developments that I'm not going to get into, but obviously don't reflect too well on him. And then also just his work ethic and some of the things. We know the weight has been a huge problem for him, to the point where New Orleans had to put a lot of, clauses in his contract relating to him being under a certain amount of weight. We also heard last season, or that might have been the season before last, he got suspended by New Orleans because he was late to multiple team meetings and practices. And it just doesn't strike me as a Shawn Marks guy. Like, none of what I just said, no NBA team is going to want that stuff, but especially Shawn Marks in this regime, that's just not the sort of things that they'd be looking for. I will say that there are a lot of clauses in Zion's contract that kind of make it a non-guaranteed contract. So whatever team drafts him, or whatever team trades for him, will have some outs, which does make that a little bit more intriguing, because you're not married to the amount of money that he's under contract for the next 3 seasons. But I still think the team that trades for him is going to have to give something up. And I still think that even though, you're buying low potentially, I don't think, what the Nets would have to give up, coupled with the concerns that you have about Zion on and off the court, it doesn't really strike me as a Shawn Marks guy. But I could be wrong. If the Nets want to buy low on him and they want to take a swing, something that they really haven't necessarily done on this type of guy in the past, I could see it, but it's not the most likely outcome, in my mind. Another star trade question. At this point, we can all agree this is a total rebuild from scratch. Under these circumstances, is there a realistic trade for a superstar on the table for the Nets? Which star player makes sense for the current rebuild? At this point, there isn't a realistic superstar trade, because there isn't a star that's, on the market or known to be asking out, or a team shopping a guy like that. If you're asking what player makes the most sense for the Nets in their current rebuild, it would be obviously a younger player. I mean, they just invested 5 first-round picks and rookies, guys who were 19 years old. So they reset the timeline somewhat. So when you're at this point and you're that far away from being a contending team, you would obviously want it to be a younger player. But none of those guys who are younger, in on-rookie contracts or on their second contracts seem to be realistically available right now. So the guy that seems like it would make the most sense or is the most realistic would be Giannis Antetokounmpo in Milwaukee, because we know that the Nets have, extensive interest in him. It's been reported for the last 2 years. Right now, he's with the Bucks and remains committed to the Bucks, but that could all change. Does that make a ton of sense to me? No, because I think that the Nets are still very far away from being a contending team, and they just made 5 first-round picks, 5 rookie first-round picks they have coming in. That's a third of your roster is 19 years old or younger, with the exception of Danny Wolf, who's 21. But you just have a really young roster. Obviously, those guys can be used in trades to try to revamp the roster around a guy like Giannis. And Giannis is the guy that I could see it for, because he's I could understand it for, because he's still a top 3 player in the NBA. How often do you get to, acquire one of those guys? He's about to be 30, or he is 30 years old, about to be 31 years old. I could understand it, even if I don't think it's the best route for the Nets still, but that one makes sense. If you're looking at the other stars that potentially could be available, like you hear the names that have been speculated. We just talked about Zion. I outlined why I don't think he's much of a Nets guy. A guy like John Moran, he's not on the trade block. Obviously, Memphis just made a big move with Desmond Bane. They're trying to revamp that roster. But is he a guy who could be on the move? Another guy, don't think fits the Nets culture. I don't think fits what the Nets would want to do, even from an on-court perspective. Extremely reliant on explosive athleticism, is not a good shooter, don't really like how his game is going to age. I think his impact has been overrated throughout his career. So Ja, not a guy I'd be on. Next tier of guys like Domantas Sabonis, Trae Young. Like Sabonis is a guy who is about to be 30 years old. Does that really make sense? Do you want to be paying him, 25% of your salary cap moving forward? I don't really like that move for him. Trae Young, another guy like Sabonis, obviously on the polar opposite end of the spectrum, but there's concerns about how far can you go? Like, how far can you go paying Domantas Sabonis 25% of your cap with that player archetype? Trae Young, undersized guard who's going to get hunted on defense, mercilessly in the playoffs. How far can you go with him? There's obviously questions about that. None of those guys really make much sense for me. Like, who else could we be talking about? Like Lauri Markkanen, maybe a guy who's, been rumored to maybe be a trade guy for the Jazz. He's like 28, about to be 29. Like, could that make some sense? He's still making a lot of money. I just don't know. Like, I just don't see a star trade that makes a lot of sense with where the Nets are going right now, because, as I said, they have a third of their roster is like 19, even more than a third of their roster is like 21 years old or younger. It's like 8 or 9 guys, and they're just so far away. Like, those guys are all going to need multiple years before they're ready to contribute in a playoff-ready rotation. So if you're trading for a guy who's close to 30 years old, a superstar, you just have so much of your roster that you need to reshuffle and revamp. So I do think that this is a true rebuild for the Nets. I think they're going to try to get a star guy in the draft this coming season. And if a star who maybe is a little bit on the younger side becomes available, I could see them obviously trying to pounce, but that doesn't happen all too often, because having cost-controlled young stars is really important. So we'll see. I don't see a star trade that makes a ton of sense. I do think the most realistic one will be Giannis Antetokounmpo, because I think that the Nets could try to get him and just go for it and fast-track the timeline and just try to build their roster out on the fly. But that's what I see for that. Next question before we go to a break. What do you think the best-case scenario is for the Nets this season? The best-case scenario for the Nets season is 2 things. They land one of the top 3 spots in the lottery, and they have a chance at the best chance of getting the number 1 pick, or at least being in the top 3 and getting one of those, top 3 guys of Darren Peterson, AJ DeBansta, Cam Boozer. That's objective number 1. Objective number 2 is the young guys, like all the rookies, Yegor Dioman, Nolan Traore, Drake Powell, Ben Surratt, Danny Wolf, Noah Clowney. Also, I'd put in that group Tariq Whitehead. We'll see what he is. But all of those guys show encouraging development signs. And, even further than that, some of the guys that the Nets do have on the roster, whether it be Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, whoever else you want to say, play well and maybe can be pieces moving forward or do increase their trade value. Like, those are the things that the Nets are looking for. It's draft lottery odds, it's player development. And I think that those are the 2 buckets that they're going to fall in. And, we'll see how it plays out. But we got a lot more questions, a lot more takes about roster management, potential trades, how the Nets could be approaching the season. So I'll touch on all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. College football is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than the energy of tailgates and being in the stands with your fellow fans. The only downside, trying to get tickets. Endless queues, hidden fees, and prices that jump at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives you the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. Guys, I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games as low as $25. The app makes it super simple. I could even see the exact view from my seat before buying, and Game Time has zone deals too. Pick the section. Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way that I've bought tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets podcast on this Fan Take Friday, rolling on through more of your takes and questions. Next one, Erik, I enjoy the podcast. Thanks for your work. Thank you for listening. Charlotte has additional first-round picks from previous trades, but seem to be lacking a center. Could Nick Claxton be heading to the Hornets, maybe for Miami's 2027 first-round pick? The Hornets have expiring contracts in Pat Connaughton and Colin Sexton. This is something that, I've not any source intel information, but I've heard fans and other reporters speculating about because the Hornets obviously do not have a center. They're probably going into the year with Moussa Diabate as their starting center. They also have Mason Plumlee, so that's not a good center rotation for a team that's hoping to make a leap this year. And the Nets have Nick Claxton, and he's going to be 27 years old. I've talked about Claxton and his potential as a trade candidate for a while this offseason, but a guy who is young enough to be a part of the team's next iteration, but also with Day'Ron Sharpe waiting in the wings, with Danny Wolf, just being drafted, and with Nick's age relative to the rest of the roster, it would make some sense to try to get something for him if you could. Could that be in Charlotte? I definitely think they're the most needy team for a center, and they definitely want to have a lob threat there alongside LaMelo Ball. If you look at the picks that Charlotte has, I think their 2027 picks would be the places I would look, or they have their own 2026 pick. They're not going to be good again this season. I'd expect them to be another lottery team. They're not going to trade that for Nick Claxton. They also have another 2026 pick that has just a bunch of swaps on it. Is probably going to be a lower pick. The Nets could look to get in there. That could be something they could look to get. If you look at 2027, which is perceived to be a much weaker draft, they have the Mavericks 2027 pick, should be on the lower side. That's protected numbers 1 through 2. They also have the Heat's 2027 pick, which is lottery protected. So, is there a scenario where the Nets could work that out? I definitely think it could be on the table. It just depends on what is Charlotte's appetite to give up future assets to try to make a leap this coming season. With how strong this draft is, they might be okay being half in and half out, and, going and, trying to make an improvement, but not doing all they can to maximize the team just to have another high draft pick this coming season. So I definitely think it's on the table. Next question is something similar. Any realistic trade opportunities to get another 2026 pick, potentially Charlotte 2026 for Clax, any surplus of 2020 picks that Oklahoma City has? I just said, I don't think that Charlotte would give up that 2026 pick for Nick Claxton. That would just be ridiculous. You'd be looking at the other picks. And I think maybe while they want to improve this season, they might not go all out, because realistically, what are they going to be? Maybe they could be a play-in team, but do you really want to do that at the expense of hurting, your lottery odds in a year that's perceived to be another good draft? At some point, you do need to get better, but I'm not sure if Charlotte is dying to trade a first-round pick for Nick Claxton when maybe they can get a center in the draft next year. Maybe there's other cheaper alternatives. We'll see, but it's definitely not off the table. On that second question, could any of the surplus 2026 picks that OKC has be an option? Probably not. I don't really see why OKC would do that. They already have the double big lineup with Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein. They just drafted Thomas Sorber in the draft, who I really like and I think has a lot of promise. So I don't know. I definitely think Nick Claxton's going to be a trade candidate, but I do think that the idea of the Nets getting a premium 2026 draft pick like Charlotte's, that's very far-fetched to me. So we'll see. But Nick's coming back. He expects to be healthier this season. He said he was using this offseason to get a back injury that he was battling last year under control. So if he comes out he regained some of that explosiveness and pop that we saw from that 2022-23 season, maybe he rehabilitates his value to the point where the Nets can actually get a good asset in return for him. Next question. Give me your honest opinion on Shawn Marks' tenure leading this franchise, from the rebuild of the Billy King Nets to the Big Three, and now the second rebuild. No matter how many excuses we make for the off-court stuff affecting the team, 10 years and one playoff series win is questionable. It's definitely questionable. And I think, like, we've heard people question, like, how much job security does Shawn Marks have? Does he just have unlimited job security? And I do think, regardless of any of the things that happen, when you've been a GM of a team for 10 years and you have one playoff series win, it's definitely questionable and definitely calls into question whether you're the right guy for the job. I will say, with Shawn Marks' rebuild, his first rebuild, he inherited what a lot of people were calling the worst situation in NBA history. They had no draft picks. They had no young talent really on the roster. They had to just, try to get off veterans in order to recoup draft capital and hit that way. So those first 2-3 years of Shawn Marks' tenure, can you really hold it against him that they didn't have success or a playoff, series win? I don't think so, because, there was really no hope that they were going to. So those years are kind of really a scratch in terms of them having playoff series wins. And then you look at the way he rebuilt it the first time. He had great roster management, great use of cap space, great drafting, hitting on guys late in the draft, whether you talk about like a Jared Allen or a Karis LeVert, or finding G League guys like Joe Harris or Spencer Dinwiddie. He clearly has an eye for talent, and he rebuilt it to the point where they were attractive enough and had the cap space for the team to sign guys like KD and Kyrie. And honestly, there's a lot of off-court stuff that I think was out of his control, like COVID was like a black swan event that I think really obviously derailed the Nets. Even with that, if they didn't have the injuries to Harden and Kyrie in that playoff series, I think they were the unquestioned title favorite. So how different is it for Shawn Marks if they win a championship that year? Like, he is hailed as a savior forever. Like, they'd be building him a statue outside of Barclays Center if they won a title, and KD and those guys also. So there was some bad luck. I will say, I think that when you bring in stars like KD and Kyrie and James Harden and all those guys, you can't do it, but your job is to manage those personalities to the best of your ability to keep them happy. Obviously, a lot of that is on you, on ownership, on the head coach that you bring in. And I think that Marks fell well short there. I think he acquiesced to what Harden and to what KD and Kyrie wanted far too often, whether it was firing Kenny Atkinson, a guy who was clearly the best coach option for them, I think, at that point, bringing in a guy like Steve Nash, who obviously he had a pass with and liked, but also it seemed like KD liked him as well. Like, I think he just made decisions there. Like, I think his coaching decisions, from Steve Nash to Jacques Vaughn, obviously they wanted to hire Ime Udoka, another thing that was out of their control. The NBA kind of nixed that. But I just think the management of the personalities, some of the head coaching decisions, how, Shawn Marks and Joe Tsai handled the COVID situation with Kyrie and, ruling him out and then bringing him back for away games and kind of being 1 foot in and 1 foot out on that. I think that was all tough. That might have been a more a Joe Tsai decision than a Shawn Marks decision. But I just think that he didn't do the best job that he could, obviously, handling the dynamic during that Big Three era. But even with that, if you take away some really bad injury luck, the Nets could have been a title team. And ultimately, when you bring in guys like KD and Kyrie, like, it is a players' league, and it's really tough to manage those personalities. So I do think that it's really tough to see 10 years and one playoff series win, but I'd say there's a lot of nuance in the Shawn Marks conversation. Like, I do think he has an eye for talent. I do think that, he's put together good teams in the past. I think that he put together a title favorite, basically building it from scratch. So that can't be written off. I think he did well in the Mikal Bridges trade. But then, they honestly are going to have to show success pretty soon, in my opinion, in order for him to keep this job. So I'd say that I think any criticisms of Shawn Marks, are fair from the perspective of his lack of success being the GM this long. But I do think that there are a lot of circumstances that were somewhat out of his control that really negatively affected the team and what he had built. So a very nuanced question, a very nuanced answer. But I would say that I think that Shawn Marks is a talented GM. I do think he's going to have to show improvement in some of the decisions of how he's managing stuff from the top down. And I think the hiring of Jordi Fernandez was a good start, because it seems like that's just a move that's drawing rave reviews out of the gate. So we'll see how they move forward in the rebuild. Next question, other than the consensus top three in the 2026 draft, which is Darren Peterson, AJ Debinska, Cam Boozer, who would you like to see in Brooklyn next year? Like, those top three guys are the guys I would like to see. The Nets get one of them. I think Darren Peterson seems like the number one right now, the guy who is the top prize of the draft. But if you're talking about outside of those top three, Nate Ament, who is a 6'11" wing going to Tennessee this coming season, going to be an incoming freshman, is a guy who I think a lot of people have as like right outside of that top three. I've watched some tape on Ament, not too much yet, but he is 6'11", as I said. He can handle the ball a little bit. Really, really talented shot maker, has incredible length. Slight frame, obviously, but he's only 18 years old. Just a guy who's extremely talented as an offensive player and has incredible size. So he's a guy who I think is really exciting. Beyond that, you have Mikel Brown, who is a 6'4" point guard. Another point guard. I think a lot of Nets fans would say that's ridiculous, but he's going to Louisville. He's extremely talented, has a ton of athletic pop, good shooter, natural passer, and ball handler. Another guy, Jaden Quaitance, a 6'10" big man who played at Arizona State last season, is transferring to Kentucky this year. Played at Arizona State. He's not even 18 years old. He's about to turn 18 and has already played his freshman year. So he played last season at 17, which is incredible and looks really promising. I mean, is just a athletic specimen, is a guy who can score around the rim, is a really superb rim protector, has tried to shoot it a little bit, although at very low volume, but a guy who's just a physical beast and is, not even 18 years old and is going into his sophomore year, was playing against a lot of grown dudes last year and looked really promising. So those are the guys outside of the top three, I think, who are the top, consensus right now, but I'm gonna have to dig more into the tape. But this is a really talented draft, another really talented draft after last year. And I think if the Nets can get into that top five, there's a good chance that they're going to get a very good player. Next question, has there been any word on how Dariq Whitehead's first injury-free summer is progressing? Is the team still high on him? I'd say this is his second injury-free summer. He wasn't injured last summer, and he was using that to kind of get his body together. We saw him play last year in Long Island. He had some encouraging stretches there. He had some struggles. We saw him come up with the Nets. He looked like a very talented three-point shooter and shot, like mid-40s on decently high volume, but the physical pop, the physical explosiveness, all of that wasn't there. And from everything that I've heard, he's been using this offseason, obviously, to get further removed from injuries, try to get his body right, and try to regain that explosiveness that made him one of the top recruits, a top 3 recruit in that 2022 high school class. So we'll see. I haven't heard anything bad. I know he's working. He didn't play at Summer League, which a lot of people were surprised by, but this is going to be somewhat of a make or break year for Dariq, and there's obviously going to be a lot of eyes on him because the Nets are approaching decisions on those 2023 draft picks in Noah Clowney, Dariq, and Jalen Wilson. So we will see. We have some more takes. Going to close it out when I touch on some roster stuff, some Michael Porter Jr. stuff, some other front court questions. So I have all that when I close on Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, we have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you all for helping us out. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode on this Fan Take Friday. We got a few more rolling through them. How do you envision the future in terms of big men for the Nets? They got Claxton and Day'Ron, also Danny Wolf, but none of these guys seem like long-term starting caliber centers, except for maybe Claxton, who doesn't fit the timeline. Also, the draft doesn't seem to have the ideal center. I think that Shawn Marks has shown that he's been capable of finding big men throughout his tenure. You got Jared Allen in the early 20s. He got Nick Claxton in the first pick of the second round. He got Day'Ron Sharpe at the 29th pick. So he's shown a willingness to backfill the center position through the draft. He obviously took a late flyer on Danny Wolf this past draft, and he's had success and he's had a good track record with finding those guys. If you're talking about the guys that are on the roster, I think that Claxton is likely not going to be a part of the next iteration. He is young enough, as I've said, but I just think that with how much the Nets have reset their timeline and with what Claxton has showed relative to Day'Ron and some of these other guys, barring him having just an incredible season this year, I think the Nets could look to move on from him. And even if he does have an incredible season, it would probably make the most sense to cash in on his value. So I think they're going to see how Day'Ron develops. Day'Ron just got that bridge deal, similar to what Nick Claxton signed at the end of his rookie contract. Day'Ron got the 2 for 2 years, $12 million total. So we'll see how he plays, and he could be a guy who extends and becomes their center of the future. Do I think that he's going to be a starting caliber guy? I just did an episode on this with Lucas Kaplan. Probably not, but I do think he'll be a rotation caliber guy. And if the Nets move on from Claxton, I do think that they'll be able to find someone else. And then we'll also see how Danny Wolf comes along. So that's what I'd say about that. Next one. Should the Nets stop prioritizing asset acquisition over player development? For instance, if they plan on starting Highsmith and play him big minutes to flip him for seconds over guys like Dariq Whitehead, Drake Powell, that would be similar to DFS over Clowney last year. CT, Cam Thomas, also could have been getting reps at point guard over Dennis or D'Lo. Like, I don't really have a problem with the way that the Nets have played. Like, I think that they've gotten their young guys minutes when they should be getting minutes. I don't think they've necessarily prioritized like asset acquisition so much over development. Like Noah Clowney was playing a lot last season. Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy that they wanted to trade, and they flipped him, early, midway through the season, like it was well before the trade deadline. And then Clowney just suffered 3 ankle injuries. Like saying Cam Thomas could have been getting reps at point guard over Dennis or D'Lo, like Cam has been playing a ton when he's been healthy, in the last 2 seasons. I guess if you're saying you think he should be playing point guard more, like I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think he's a point guard. I guess the argument could be that you're saying it would help him as a playmaker. But, when he was healthy, he was playing even in the second half of the season before last. Kevin Ollie did give him some reps at point guard. So I don't really have a problem with how they've been handling their young guys and player development. And I think that they're going to get a lot of guys minutes this year. So that's what I'd say about that. Next question. Who do you think will have the biggest impact long-term between Noah Clowney or Day'Ron Sharpe? Interesting question because I just did episodes on Day'Ron and Noah with Lucas Kaplan. I would say Day'Ron Sharpe. I just think that physically he has the body and the tools to hang with NBA-level athletes more so right now than Noah Clowney does. And I think that Day'Ron does things in terms of the defensive impact he had last year, some of the rim protection he flashed, and obviously the offensive rebounding that he brings. I think he just has more concrete skills that impact the game. But we'll see how Noah develops. Last couple. I think the general expectation is some form of tanking to get the most out of our pick this year. Do you think we still send rookies to the G League with that in mind? And if so, which ones do you think will be sent? Yeah, I do think that the Nets are going to have some guys play in the G League. And I've said this, I think the 2 most likely out of the gate will be Ben Surratt and Danny Wolf, because if you look at the point guard situation, the Nets obviously have 2 point guards in Yegor Dioman and Nolan Shore. I think you could say Dioman could play the wing. You could say that Ben Surratt also could play the wing, but I just think the Nets have a lot there. If they bring back Cam Thomas, they just have ball handlers who are going to be ahead of Surratt. So I think he'll be on the outs in terms of that rotation initially. And then you look at Danny Wolf, as I said, they have Nick Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe at center. Both of those guys are going to need to play at the 4. You have guys like Michael Porter Jr., Noah Clowney, Zaire Williams. Like, do I think Danny Wolf and Ben Surratt will get minutes, NBA minutes at some point throughout the year? Yes. But I do think that I could see them being guys who start in the G League at the beginning of the year. Next question, last question. This question is about Curious Mike. From his statements regarding his move to the Nets, he seemingly is using the Nets as a platform to stat max, in quotation marks. Do you think he will have a net positive impact on the Nets this coming season? What do you think about him generally? I do think, obviously, that Mike seems excited about coming in and having an expanded role. Like he said that he made sacrifices in Denver playing alongside Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. And he said that he thinks that he has more in the tank still in terms of what he can do as an offensive player. And Jordi Fernandez has said that he's going to give Michael Porter Jr. an expanded role, and he's expecting him to do things that to be asked to do things that he's never done before. And Porter Jr. said that he's excited about that and excited to explore and expand his game. So I do think that he's going to try, obviously, to put up bigger numbers than he did in prior season. He's going to try to expand his game and do more things as a pick and roll ball handler in ISO situations. Like that's what he said he's expecting. And he also said, like, he just had a video where he was training with Trae Young, and Trae Young said, like, you're going to average 25 points per game this year. He said, Porter Jr. said, I got to. He said he's trying to get his first All-Star selection. So he's obviously trying to take a step up in the caliber of player and how he's viewed. Do I think that he's necessarily going to be an all-star level player? Like, no. Do I think he's going to score more probably than he has in prior season? I do, just based on volume. And do I think that he's going to have a net positive impact on the Nets this coming season? I do, just because he's still a 6'10" sharpshooter. He's still their best player. He's still a guy that I think will offer shot creation, which is the most glaring weakness of this Nets team this coming season. So I think MPJ will make the Nets better when he's on the floor. I think that he'll try to expand his game. Do I think that's going to result in him being viewed as a completely different tier of player than he was before? No, I think he is kind of who we've seen him to be, but I do think it'll be interesting to see how he approaches that. But that does it. That's all the questions and takes that we have on this Fan Take Friday. Appreciate everyone for your participation and for submitting takes and questions. We got a bunch. But if you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you have a second and you enjoy the content, smash that like button, leave a comment. Really helps with engagement and the algorithm. So I really appreciate that. But we're rolling on through August ending. We got September coming, which means training camp is on the horizon. I'll have more talk and everything here on Locked On Nets when I'm back on Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.